Good morning to everyone out there in Medical Alley. My name is Frank Jaskalki, and I'm so pleased to host this webinar this morning on the cellular therapy revolution that's happening in Medical Alley right now. It's kind of a great day to be doing this as we saw Catamaran Bio announce their $42 million fundraise with technology out of the University of Minnesota and backed by Medical Alley members Takeda and Astellas. And also on the same day that we saw Arch Ventures put 800 million into launching National Resilience Inc. to transform the manufacturing processes in cellular therapy, a topic we're going to talk about today. But before we get started, I want to say a thank you to the sponsor of the Medical Alley webinar series, the American Medical Association, and share a few words from them. So this webinar is sponsored by the AMA, American Medical Association, who are the stewards of current procedural terminology, or the CPT code set that so many of you know well. Trusted for more than 50 years, the CPT code set drives communications across healthcare by enabling seamless processing and advanced analytics for medical services and procedures. Hundreds of codes are updated every year to reflect the latest medical services and technologies and help to support and deliver clinically relevant outcomes. As medicine evolves with clinical innovations such as genomic testing and remote patient monitoring, physicians, innovators, and many other stakeholders working within the healthcare will need to assess whether a new or updated CPT code is needed to describe their innovation. The CPT code set stands primed for and ready to grow and change with input from stakeholders across the healthcare landscape. And we thank the AMA for helping to make this webinar possible. And so with that, we'll get started. I'll say as we're going through the webinar, just two quick things for our audience. One, if you have questions, throw them in the Q&A function on there. I'll be following those and we'll bring those into the discussion. I bet you'll have a lot more interesting questions than the things I could come up with, so please drop them in there. And then second, the fun with doing these Zoom webinars is we have our guests in their homes or in their home offices. Real life happens. I might have a cat pop into the screen. There might be a kid that pops up. Please be empathetic and understanding as we're all going through this fun year of work from home. And with that, we're going to start with just quick introductions, do kind of a around the horn. And Dave, you're in the top of my screen. So could you just introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about Biotechne? Oh, and you're on mute.
Yeah, thanks, Frank. I'm pitch hitting for Chuck Cummett today, our CEO. So Chuck, sorry you couldn't be here, but I'm happy to talk to you about Biotechne and about cell therapy. Yeah, I'm the president of Protein Sciences segment for Biotechne. I've been there about 7 years. Biotechne is about a $800 million life science company headquartered in Minneapolis. And we have about 2,300 employees worldwide. More than 700 of them are in Minneapolis. And we're about $11.5 billion market cap, I think. Our core strength is in life science reagents and instrumentation for research, diagnostic, and therapeutic development. And obviously, we have a strong presence in the cell therapy space, and we're making significant investments there now.
Thank you. And we'll want to come back to that investment side with some of the recent things you all have done. Amy, if you would.
Sure, thanks, Frank, and thank you to Medical Alley for hosting this today. I'm Amy Ronneberg, the Chief Executive Officer of Be the Match, also known as the National Marrow Donor Program. Our organization is located here in the Twin Cities. We have about 1,100 employees, mostly here in Minneapolis, but about 100 or 200 throughout the country. We're about a $500 million organization, and our focus is on, and always has been really, on cell therapy and the cell therapy of bone marrow transplant. So Be the Match focuses on registering donors, matching those donors through an algorithm, facilitating the movement of product, the collection of product, and then outcomes. So tracking outcomes for every patient that has had an allogeneic transplant for the last 30 years.
Wonderful, thank you. And I think people are going to be surprised as we go through this discussion how much activity there already is, and that's already in the region. And Michele, you're certainly a part of that. So can you tell us a bit about yourself and Aldevron?
Yeah, good morning. Thanks, Frank, and thanks to the Medical Alley for organizing as well. So my name is Michele Berg, and I serve as the president for the GMP Nucleic Acids Business Unit within Aldevron. And I rejoined the organization in May of last year in this role. But prior to that, had worked and helped to stand up Aldevron when we formed in 1998. So I'm proud to represent Aldevron today. We are a leading manufacturer that provides DNA, RNA, and protein to the life science fields, and specifically to the cell therapy field for a number of different end applications. And our headquarters is just to the west of Minnesota in Fargo, North Dakota. We have a total of 530 employees between our sites in Fargo and Madison, Wisconsin, and a good number of them are right from Minnesota as well. So I'm looking forward to the conversation here today. Thank you.
Wonderful, thank you. Where I want to start is just maybe a little bit of level setting. We have an audience that they know this space well, but there might be a few who don't. So maybe Amy, I'll ask you this, since Be The Match has really pioneered this field. When we say cellular therapy, what is that?
Sure. Again, from a rudimentary perspective, cell therapy really is the use of human cells to treat some type of indication. Bone marrow transplant was one of the very first cell therapies. And actually, I don't know if everybody knows this, but back in the late 60s, the first successful unrelated bone marrow transplant took place here in Minnesota. And I think the individual is successful, and the individual still is living today, I believe, in Prior Lake. So cell therapy really is the use of human cells, whether it's your own cells or somebody else's cells, to cure or treat some indication.
Very cool, thank you. And it's really amazing to hear that the first was here and the person is still around. Just a quick follow-up question. Be The Match has gone through a pretty significant transformation over the last, call it 5 or 10 years, including the creation of Be The Match Biotherapies. And something that struck me, being in the nonprofit world as well, is that the developments happening in cellular therapy could, in some ways, threaten the need for existing bone marrow or cord blood transplants. But Be The Match has made the decision to really support that and accelerate that development. How has the organization thought about advancing technologies that might compete with the existing organization?
Yeah, great question, Frank. So at the end of the day, there are 18,000 patients in need of a bone marrow transplant in the US alone. And those are indications that can be treated with a bone marrow transplant, such as leukemia, lymphomas, sickle cell disease. We had our best year ever in the history of the company last year, and we treated 6,600. So there's still an enormous gap of patients who are not receiving their life-saving therapy. So we welcome other therapies. We welcome it because we know today that there are many who don't have a match, many who don't have the opportunity to have a bone marrow transplant. We see cell therapy as a great partner. In some cases, it'll be that bridge to transplant. In other cases, it will be all that patient needs. And for us, our vision is to democratize cell therapy, equal outcomes for all. Our mission is to save lives through cellular therapy. And that cellular therapy can be a CAR T, an NK cell. It does not have to just be a bone marrow transplant. So we welcome the opportunity to partner and take the skills that we have developed and the network we've developed over the last 30 years and to bring that forward into today's kind of modern cell therapy.
Oh, very good. And yeah, and we're going to come back to that, these enabling technologies. And kind of related to that, Dave, Biotechne's made some pretty significant investments in this space, including the recent opening of a new facility in St. Paul. Could you talk a little bit about that facility and how Biotechne is thinking about the cell therapy space?
Right. Well, yeah, you're right. We making a big investment in St. Paul, close to $50 million for a state-of-the-art GMP reagents manufacturing facility. The facility itself is in final validation, equipment qualification, and we expect to start producing our first production lots there in the beginning of the new calendar year. The first things we're going to be producing in there will be GMP proteins. So we're the world leader in terms of breadth and size of production capability for proteins in general. And GMP proteins, I think, are going to be in very large demand because there's so many cell therapies in development. And we just think there's not going to be enough capacity in the world for all the protein that's going to be required. So we're trying to get ahead of the curve and done a lot of work to scale up production of these proteins, not as easy as just making a bigger batch. And so we're in the midst of that, and we should have start selling product there from that facility sometime in the second quarter of next calendar year. Our customers are all of the cell therapy customers, so T cell, NK cell, regenerative medicine, people doing stem cell work. And there's over 1,000 clinical trials going on. So we think there's going to be tremendous demand for GMP proteins and other reagents. And down the road, we've reserved some space in the building for us to make other types of reagents there at scale. But we have some other GMP capabilities as well. We have a facility in Massachusetts for making our GMP clouds. And then we have a small facility right around the corner from us in Minneapolis where we can actually support early phase clinical trials. And that's using our non-viral gene editing technology. So yeah, we're making big investments in the space, and especially in Minneapolis in terms of the capabilities, GMP reagents to support cell therapy customers.
Oh, very nice. Yeah, and Michele, we've heard from a lot of organizations kind of this challenge in manufacturing. In fact, the release that had gone out today and announcing this resilience, saying one of the founders had described in traditional drug development, 80% of the work in the clinical phase and 20% in the manufacturing phase. But for cellular and gene therapies, the numbers get flipped. I'm curious, the investments that Aldevron's making, you're a very fast growing company right now. What are you all doing in this space, and where do you see some of the challenges that yet remain?
Yeah, thanks, Frank. Similar to what David mentioned with regard to investing in GMP capacity and the build out thereof, that's something that we're in the throes of as well, up in Fargo. And so, really since '98, our focus has really been on supporting and enabling breakthrough science to reach patients. And so in that effort, we want to make sure that we're never the bottleneck. And so that's where you see that investment in build out of capacity. Currently through our first building, our GMP facility B1, we have 70,000 square feet. And we're adding an additional 189,000 that is scheduled to be ready in early 2021. And so that's something that I think is going to offer the fields of both cell and gene therapy as well as gene editing, significant opportunity through that capacity. And and so we're really excited to have that come online, and primarily, again, with regard to support for cell therapy, that is through our plasmid DNA manufacturing services at various scales, and then certainly quality levels of release.
Very good.
And as far as the hurdles, I was going to say you had a second question in there, just some of the challenges and hurdles. I think it's true. There's a lot of discussion in and around capacity and lead times, turnaround times. There's a high focus on that simply because, people are realizing the promise and the potential of these advanced therapeutics. And so because, as you mentioned, things have been flipped, so to speak, there's a very significant focus on CMC, the chemistry manufacturing controls component, simply because there's such an accelerated potential for the development of these types of therapies. We'll talk a little bit later about what the agency has done to provide an accelerated path, and just really how how quickly these things can move and the importance of focusing on your manufacturing strategy as early as possible.
And thank you. And maybe building off of that, Amy, I'd ask you, what are some of the other barriers that we've seen in the development and the deployment of these therapies, or things that, if there are innovators in the audience, that they should be working on?
Well, definitely manufacturing is one that we hear about all the time, and just delays in manufacturing, finding slots, just the overall capacity. We work with about 40 different cell and gene therapy companies, 2 of which are commercial, others who are still in that process. I would say standardization and the issues there. So a lot of them today, that we work with, the 2 particularly that are approved, Kymriah and Yescarta, they're working with the transplant centers. And so the folks that we've been working with for years, and all of them have their own ordering platform. All of them have a different way of needing to do their audits on the and different processes. And what we're hearing already is just being overwhelmed. And there's only 2 that have been approved, right? That from that perspective. And so from the hospital and physicians, we really need to standardize. We are not going to be successful if we have dozens and dozens of different processes and ordering platforms and, just everything across the board. So one of the things that Be the Match has really been focused on, and our Be the Match Biotherapies in particular, is standardization. We've continued to get the field together to talk about how do we have a similar ordering mechanism. How do we, and one of the things we've done is standardized the audit process of the apheresis network, because we heard from our apheresis partners that they felt like all they were doing was doing audits. And so we've come in, we do the audit, we package it up, and then the organizations can say, hey, that's 80% or 90% of what I need. I can now just spend, half a day instead of days. We will be announcing soon, unfortunately I can't say it today, but a partnership with a very significant piece of the process, and how do we work together truly and figuring out how to standardize. So that's one of the things that, we hear that really keeps physicians up at night right now.
Well, very good. And I want to come back to this topic of standardization. And Michele, you mentioned the regulatory environment. Come back to that. A couple of questions from the audience to jump in real quick. Dave, for you, the question on, are there any plans for Biotechne that you can talk about to move into GMP cell therapy manufacturing in addition to protein manufacturing?
Yes, there are, Frank. We're currently doing work. So we have a non-viral gene editing technology, and oftentimes our customers want to try that in their early phase clinicals. They need a place to do it. So it makes sense, and we've invested in a small facility right around the corner from our main Minneapolis site. And it's up and running already, and we're actually going to be supporting some early phase clinical work there beginning in January. So we're already making steps in that direction. I'm not sure I want to be a contract manufacturer other than, to provide strategic benefit to certain customers, because there are a number of larger customers in that space. I think for us anyway, it's going to become a requirement for some of our, for customers to be able to test drive some of our reagents, for us to be able to grow cells for them and modify cells for them genetically. We're going to have to be able to do it in our own building. So yeah, we are making investments in that way.
That's great to hear. And Michele, I'm curious to ask you, it seems like this has been a space that, there's been decades of research. We've talked about the promise for a long time. And then call it all of the sudden in the last couple of years, we've seen therapies come out, standards develop. Is there a catalyst moment, or what is it about right now where these things seem to be happening all at once?
Yeah, I mean, it's been certainly a build in the making over the last handful of decades, as you referenced. And I think what's happening is that now we're starting to see just the start to what I think will be a pretty significant wave of future successes where we're seeing just how transformational these potential and now, true therapies are. Amy referenced the two that have already been approved in the cell therapy space, but even on the gene therapy side with Zolgensma and, the transformational results, the life-saving results that you see now in these children affected by SMA. I think that's got a lot of people excited. And so you're now seeing an investment beyond kind of that initial, what would have been academic focus, and, seeing companies, start up in and around, and certainly organizations, large pharma entities that are now paying attention and, putting forth money and support for these types of programs. So it really is just this convergence of success, of financial support, and significant runway. Dave mentioned that there are 1,000 clinical studies ongoing, and I believe at least 20–30% of those are phase 1. I think the vast majority are phase 2, but just suggests that there's going to be that continued wave of incoming candidates. And as I said, we're preparing for success. We see it, and we're excited about it too.
Yeah. Dave, go ahead.
I was to say that, I think the government grant and private funding has been very healthy for the last several years because of the success of the 2 products that are out there commercially now. I think also there's been a big investment in production capacity by contract manufacturing organizations that make provide space for startups, and there's been a lot of advancements in manufacturing and process development that have made it easier and faster to standardize things. It's not all the way to bright by any means, but I think it's getting there. I think also the regulations are improved and evolved. So I think it's a clearer path. And then, just larger scale of production, like, some of the things Michele's doing and also, the kind of things we're doing are helping, I think, to make these things feasible. The costs are starting to come down. I don't think they're anywhere near where they need to be yet. But I think companies are getting savvier, but, starting sooner to get thinking about their manufacturing processes to reduce cost and cycle time and variability. And all these things together collectively are leading to, faster paced emergence of these technologies.
I'm always amazed at how a bunch of little things or even a bunch of big things kind of build up, and it's like a dam breaking where one or two get through, and then the explosion of innovation. And Dave, you anticipated my next question. I want to start with Amy on this one, but I'd invite all of you. How is the regulatory environment for this space today? And, Medical Alley is a policy organization, among other things. What should we be advocating for to improve the environment so more of these therapies, get to patients who need them?
Yeah, so specific to the regulatory component, it is interesting, when first Kymriah Yescarta was out, I think it was, it was a little bit of an uphill battle in trying to figure out the distribution, the regulatory, the, quality, all of those components. And I think, I can't remember, I'm sorry if it was Dave or Michele that mentioned that really it is that 80-20, but it's flipped compared to normal drug manufacturing. And I think the therapies right now that are coming through have had the luxury of being able to learn from Novartis and Kite, and now are coming out far more ahead of the game. So from that perspective, from a policy perspective, that second part of the question, the big concern right now is cost. And I don't know if you want to go there right now, Frank, but, when you look at even bone marrow transplant, easily it's going to be a minimum of $300,000. And if you look at Medicare, Medicaid, right now they cover $79,500. Big gap right now. And today, most of these therapies have a very high price tag, oftentimes even higher than bone marrow transplant. So it could be an extremely expensive bridge to transplant. And the only way I believe that we're going to be able to see the reduction in cost is to move from that auto to allo. That being said, until that happens, we need to continue to really push, because we are seeing an incredible disparity right now. And one of the pieces of our vision is equal outcomes for all to democratize cell therapy. Today, if you're a white patient, you have a 77% chance of getting that bone marrow transplant. So you are likely to have a donor and you're likely to have that coverage. If you're, and I'll use the Black African-American because it's at the other end, it's only 28% likelihood. And a lot of it has to do, some of it has to do with the match, but a lot of it has to do with the overall cost. And that disparity is one of the biggest disparities in modern medicine today, and will only continue to grow with the price tags that we see today. So for us to truly make sure from a policy perspective that everybody has the ability to obtain their life-saving therapy, we have a lot of work to do to keep pushing that, to keep pushing the price, to keep pushing coverage.
Well said.
Frank,
please.
Yeah, thanks. I would add to what Amy had shared about the regulatory perspective. So, I think it's important to understand that the regulators are still quite new to the science and to this field as well. So they're kind of walking that same line, and I think in some cases looking to the experts in the field to help provide them that background and education. And I know that they're really working hard to onboard as many as they can, such that they're not the bottleneck in hindering advancement of these therapies through the drug development process. But I do want to say too that gratefully they have engaged things such as additional guidances, designations, specifically RMAT, which was I think put in place sometime in 2016. That's specific to these fields. So that's regenerative medicine, advanced therapeutics, or advanced therapies rather, designation, and that really allows for an accelerated path to approval. So by doing so, it's more of a rolling review of the submission, as opposed to just kind of taking it all at the very end and then performing that review. And that's for advanced therapies, cell therapies that would focus in and around like a life-threatening rare disorder or something that has an unmet need. So, we do see some really good positive nods from the agencies that, there's belief and support that these could be transformational, as mentioned before, and that they're really working hard to think about how can they play a part in moving these forward and more swiftly without compromise, of course, to safety and quality.
I think one.
And with regard to Amy's, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say one other barrier for the whole industry in general is, obviously because they're not totally proven yet, cell therapies end up third or fourth line therapies. They're typically given only to refractory or relapse patients that are in advanced stages of disease like cancer. And so it really makes a high hurdle to get over for the therapies themselves. And it takes a long time. Also, a lot of trials are combination therapies, which makes it more complex to sort out the benefits. And so I think just that the regulatory environment being a little more open to some of these potentially curative therapies would help to advance them faster. I think it's just big barriers to proving efficacy.
And I want to continue along this theme because we've talked a fair bit about the manufacturing challenges, some of the regulatory challenges. One other that I've heard from a number of organizations is the logistical challenge that, these therapies aren't like moving a bottle of aspirin. And Amy, I know this is an area that Be the Match has worked in extensively. Can you first talk a little bit about what is the logistics involved in this, and then what are we doing about it?
Sure, absolutely. I'll start with kind of bone marrow transplant because that covers majority of it, and then we'll additive, which makes it one step more difficult. But if you think about that patient is getting prepped, they're getting prepped really the eradication of their immune system. So there is a very fine acrobatic act that has to happen in the collection of the cells from the donor and getting those cells to the patient. That time is of the essence. And oftentimes we have about 24 hours from the point of collection to the point of receipt to the patient. In many cases, our cells are fresh, they are not cryopreserved. And then, so in that case, you face incredible challenges. If you think about 50% of the work we do has an international component. We won't even talk about COVID. Let's just pretend pre-COVID logistical challenges. How many times flights are canceled or bad weather, or we've even gotten on snow plows to literally be able to move product. I mean, the stories go on and on. There's always something, right, from a travel perspective. Now you add on the fact that there's multiple legs, and that a lot of times, at least today, those cells are being taken from the patient, being sent to a manufacturing facility, and then being sent back. So there's that additional piece of the travel. Yes, there are times where the product is cryopreserved, but not always. There are many cases where that product still needs to remain fresh. You need to have, just from an overall chain of control, you need to ensure that in our case, they're hand delivered. Somebody literally has to have those cells in hand. So in some cases, this isn't where it's a shipper or you just put, boxes on a freight plane. There's just this whole additional set of complexities. And then you think about the manufacturing slots and making sure, again, if it is a fresh product that's going to that manufacturing site, the timing. So, I mean, again, I always think of a trapeze act, like when it comes to cell therapy logistics, and there's so many components that, again, early on, I think was a surprise to a lot of organizations, just because to them, logistics was the least of any of their worries when it came to drug development. And now it's one of the more challenging pieces. And I think your second part of the question, Frank, was what are we doing about it? So again, we have an apheresis network of about 80. And so we are really trying to, again, standardize the processes, trying to standardize the work that goes in, and the ordering system, the logistic components. We're looking at ways in which we can move product without it having to be handheld. We're looking at a lot of research around cryopreservation and then thawing of cells to make sure that you still have that appropriate total nucleated cell count. And also looking at, how do we partner throughout that whole supply chain so that it's one seamless, because there isn't anyone today who owns every single part of it. So how do you have a network that has worked together, can really, again, really hone in on those skills of the logistics component and have the systems behind it, which I think often get forgot about because it's not the kind of fun, sexy stuff to work on, but the systems just to maintain that, all of that chain of control has been an interesting problem to solve.
Indeed. We had a question from the audience related to that. They're asking, given the logistical concerns, and Amy, I'd start with you, but open this up to anyone. Do you envision a movement to point of care cellular therapies? And maybe this also relates to how do we get to so-called off-the-shelf cellular therapies?
Yeah, there certainly are several companies working on it. It would be an amazing opportunity, I think, for patients from the perspective of the cells not having to move. Now you face a whole different, I think, set of issues because, and again, I'm not a complete expert in this, but my understanding from a point of care is that, those systems from the point of care in every single hospital are going to be almost deemed as their own little manufacturing. So it's getting approval for hundreds as opposed to one manufacturing process and system. Again, I'm not an expert to speak to that. Maybe Michele and Dave are closer to that. what is it going to take? I think we're on our way from how we get that off the shelf, how we get to that point of care. You know, as Michele said earlier, there was years, decades of work being done in this space, and it kind of was like that tipping point. It's not something that just happened overnight. That's going to be the same here, and we're going to be able to leverage what we've learned from the the auto space to be able to convert into that allo space. So it's just a matter of time. It's a matter of when, not if. If is a for sure in my mind.
Indeed. Yeah, Michele, Dave, any comments on, you know, the movement from auto to allo to off the shelf sort of therapies?
Well, I mean, it's you know, it's been kind of the dream to be able to do that, obviously, because you can make very large batches of cells, standardized lots, and it's a lot lower cost and easier to transport. I think the obvious fear, I'm not the expert either, but is graft versus host issues. And then in order to avoid that, you either need other pharmaceuticals or genetic engineering of the cell lines so that you can minimize the chances of that. And then once you start doing genetic engineering, especially of stem cells, now there's concerns about how those cells act in the long term once they get in the body. So even though I'd love to see it, and I think it's very promising and we'll get there someday, the experts say, you know, it'll be at least 5 to 10 years or so before those therapies are you know, in the clinic in any big way, just because of those challenges I mentioned. But they are making, you know, new advancements every day, and there's a number of companies that are already trying to bring products forward. So, you know, more power to them. We'll see what happens.
Yeah, the only thing I'd add to what Dave and Amy have already shared on that is that, you know, what we see is that, you know, science iterates, right? And so much like what we're seeing for these advancements in ways to deliver these therapies and just the design of them themselves, the manufacturing also is going to continue to iterate and evolve and get more efficient. And certainly what allogeneic does offer is, you know, not just the benefits that Dave was extolling, but also, you know, that's really where you're going to see some game changers as far as cost, kind of bringing it back to our previous topic. You know, that's something that will really significantly bring something down, because as Amy said, for those individualized therapies, they're very complex. I mean, even more so on the front end where our organization exists and lives and supports, you know, exceedingly complex. In some cases, we're producing what are called neoantigens that are, you know, very personalized, highly personalized for the individual. And because of the stage with which these patients are participating in clinical trial, I think Dave made mention they're pretty late stage. And so time is not only of the essence, but it's absolutely necessary that we move quickly. But also tying it to Amy's point of logistics, you have to move swiftly and generate material under the right quality levels, release it, you know, accordingly. But you also have to make sure that it gets back to the right person at the end of the day. And it is easy to say, but a very complex path to assure yourselves that that is what we're doing.
The level of complexity involved in this is just amazing. I mean, everything in medicine is complex. This seems a couple orders of magnitude more complex. But as you said, Michele, science iterates, and then the necessity of that right now is so critical. We've got a couple of questions coming in from the audience that I want to pull and that kind of start to get at some of this. So one is a question about stuff coming out of universities, the rate of new innovation, and how some of those really early stage technologies or companies maybe should be thinking about like IND preparation and clinical manufacturing, basically setting themselves up for success at an early stage. And Michele, I want to start with you on this one because you've been involved with, in this case, Aldebaran and others with early stage companies. You know, any suggestions for those innovators when they're coming out about setting themselves up right?
Mm-hmm. You know, I'll come at it through the lens of the DNA, because again, that's primarily what we're supplying. DNA has got the genetic payload basically that will go forth and be used to generate viral vectors which will be used then to modify the cells, patient cells, or just allogeneic as an approach. And so setting yourself up for success means really thinking through, again, what decisions are being made early on oftentimes will be very important as you continue down that path, meaning if you make a change to the sequence or something to that effect later, that's a more expensive, more time costing change. And so really making sure that you've got what you believe is as final as a sequence, for example, is really important. Thinking about the attributes of your construct. The agency does not love ampicillin resistance, and so I think if you can help it, if you can make that change in your DNA for selection, then do that earlier on, because to make that change later is really expensive. I also think too, considering the population that you're looking to serve, because that dictates the type of manufacturing platform that you utilize, which again, if you can certainly switch horses midstream, but again, it is much more expensive to try to do so, from a time perspective and financial, because you have to run those comparability studies as well. And so I think really plotting out that CMC as much as possible is really going to be beneficial. We talk a lot about target product profiles and making sure that you're thinking about that as early in the development process as you can. I mean, that's something, again, that can iterate and change, evolve, but it's just really important to be thinking about the patient population, like I said, what that, the numbers might look like, and then thinking about the processes that you're going to employ, and then the attributes of your DNA construct. Again, that's very much all from the lens, as I said, about the plasmid DNA that we support.
Well said. And it sounds like the companies really should be mapping out that end-to-end process from research to patient care early on in their development. And David, sounded like you were to say something.
I was going to add, Michele hit a number of points. I mean, we also had to deal with going from research to therapeutic, things like removing ampicillin as a clone selection tool. And so we had to make a lot of modifications to scale up production. So I think people, as they think they're getting ready to move into the clinic, using the reagents and the equipment that they're going to use in their clinical production early as possible is critical, because oftentimes when they switch over, it's a big hassle. Another area is using reagents, materials that are animal origin free. That's a big deal, because the FDA, it's not impossible to use products that are animal origin, but there's a lot of hurdles in terms of viral testing and adventitious virus testing and other testing that's required to prove that you either removed all the virus or that there's no virus present. So I just think there's a lot of stringent conditions around making products GMP, and the batch sizes are typically bigger, the reproducibility is better, and so I think those companies could serve themselves well by starting sooner rather than later in making sure their process is reproducible and using the right reagents.
Indeed. Another question from the audience, this one for you, Amy, on the Be the Match Biotherapies and Lonza partnership that was just announced. They're asking, what is the partnership and what does it bring to cell therapy?
Yeah, I'm really excited about that partnership. Lonza is a great organization and has a lot of clients and companies that are working with them. We really want to, again, I've said this before, but Lonza and Be the Match Biotherapies really want to work on that standardization. How do we bring in other organizations that we already have partnerships with, say a Cryoport or Traxcell or Venetti? How do we create that end-to-end standardized process so that once we are at a point where we have a dozen or 24, we're not overwhelming the system? Because when that happens, one, they could say, I'm not taking on anymore. We're already completely overwhelmed from just too many different processes, too many different ways of ordering, too many different rules that we need to follow and regulatory rules. And that would, of course, be really bad for patients. We want to avoid that. Secondly, we know when we have that many different processes that are at today very manual, mistakes happen. And at the end of the day, that would be really, at the end of the day, it's the patient that would get hurt from that. So again, we want to take those massive amount of manual differentiating processes out of the system, standardize where we can so that the product itself is the differentiator, not the logistics, not the movement of things that, or the ordering or whatever. So that's really the focus that we have with Lonza. We're really excited about it.
Very cool. With our last 10 or so minutes, I want to shift to a final topic, which is talking about the region and the opportunities here to grow cell and gene therapy industry. We've obviously got a good base in each of your organizations and research being done at the university, at Mayo Clinic, and with others. We had a question from the audience that was asking, given our medtech expertise, and Minnesota is known as a medical device community, are there areas of opportunity for, I'll say, the region, because I'd include Fargo-Moorhead as part of this community, and Rochester, and even Madison to some degree? Are there opportunities for this region to make a bigger impact in cell therapy? What would those be, and what would you encourage the community to really focus on and prioritize investing in? Maybe Michele, start with you, and I'll come around the horn.
Sure. I'd actually grab Sioux Falls in that too, with the Sanford research entity that's down there. But what I think is really needed or is really great potential. So you think about kind of this nexus, I guess, of really great, hardworking, workforce that's well educated coming out of these institutes. Having that manufacturing footprint, so through Biotechne and Aldevron, to expand that, grow that can support the great things that are happening at the University of Minnesota and other organizations where candidates are being developed, science is being iterated upon, because that, really they are one of the leading forces in advanced therapeutics. You just don't hear them brag about it as often as some of our friends on the coast do. But, we also have the advantage of being centrally located, as well. So that feeds to the logistics aspect of things, not having to go from Boston to San Francisco, which is a long haul. So I think we have some advantages there as well. I think we can get more specific with how we are training our future workforce and getting them more specialized to support or participate in the advanced therapies area. We've got, I think it's St. Cloud State University has a pretty decent focused regulatory program. So how do we gear up those that are coming through regulatory quality education programs to be very specific in honing in on the advanced therapies fields? I think we also have an opportunity to educate, future MSLs or medical science liaisons as well, specific again to these advanced therapies. So really it's the educational aspect I think is one of our greatest opportunities, in addition to building out additional manufacturing, GMP manufacturing, and then supporting the therapeutics that are getting kind of brought out from the universities.
Dave, I might ask you to add to that, because I know Biotechne has grown quite a bit the last few years. You've been hiring, adding employees. What do you see as the regional opportunities, and has it been a challenge, finding talent as the company grows?
Yeah, one of the things Michele mentioned hit home. We struggle to find enough people with manufacturing capability that also know quality systems, ISO 13485, GMP regulations. So it's good to hear that St. Cloud has a program like that. But I think it's a detail that can be learned on the job, but it's always a lot better if you can hire people that have the experience. We get some level of that from med device, but then they don't necessarily have the biochemistry experience or the biology experience that we need. I think also, there are collaborations. The University of Minnesota does a great job. They don't get the airtime that, maybe UPenn or Baylor or other institutions get when it comes to cell and gene therapy. So I think if we maybe promoted ourselves more as a region for it. I also I've always believed in differentiation. So if you can become a center of excellence for some area of cell therapy, it's easier than trying to be, all things to all people. And then you can get a core expertise in the region and be known for something. One other thing that I think can help a lot is really formal collaborations between us. Like we formed a three-way joint venture that we announced with a company, Fresenius Kabi, who's in apheresis, but we were trying to capture the key steps around the whole workflow to make the process more uniform and predictable and shorten cycle times, reduce cost, et cetera. The other partner we had is Wilson Wolf, which is another Minnesota company that makes bioreactors for growing cells. So we work with them to optimize media, cell activation, all the steps in the process in their bioreactor. So we don't only exclusively work with them, but that partnership makes that it's a very viable workflow. And I think as a region, if we could coordinate more on some of these workflow steps, it would be beneficial to the whole market, and it would help us build our reputation. Not easy to do these joint ventures, but if you can pull them off and there's actually meaningful stuff behind it, then it gets its own momentum and gets legs, and you can make a difference. So those are just a few things that I would add.
When both you and Michele have now said the university not getting the attention it deserves, and I'd say that's an unfortunate characteristic of the whole region, that we're really good at doing our work and delivering a great outcome, and then we kind of just go back to doing more good work. And I'll say Medical Alley Association is very intent on taking up that message and telling people about the good work that you all are doing. Amy, I'd turn it to you and ask, maybe building on Dave's comment of centers of excellence, where do you see those differentiating opportunities in the region?
Yeah, we already have some amazing companies in this region. And I think I laugh, Frank, because it's something we talk about at Be the Match, that we don't toot our own horns enough. We're just not very good at that. It might be a Midwest thing. Most of the organizations that we work with are in Philly, in Boston, New York, and California, probably the same for most on this call. And I think one of the things we see is that there's just, a real need for staff in those locations. We see some, a lot of the leaders are moving every couple of years to another company because there's so many opportunities in those areas. How do we, I think just to double down on what both Dave and Michele said, mine would have been education and awareness building. How do we build awareness that we have an incredible pipeline here of knowledge and individuals, and as we could continue to educate, maybe there's programs we could do, again, from taking, we've brought quality individuals over from MedTech who have done phenomenal, with very little additional training needed to kind of move them into this space. Maybe there's additional things we could do and start to talk about those pipelines. I think the Midwest has just so much to offer on what we already have as a base and a foundation, that we truly could become, an absolute center of excellence here in general in the Midwest. So I'd love to see more awareness building coupled with some additional educational opportunities. I think, again, the pipeline for staffing in some of those, the Boston area, it's tough just because there's so many organizations there. I think we have an opportunity to really step up and, start to grab some of that.
I think well said. And, it's something I tell a lot of people when they think about like biotech in Boston or San Francisco, is that, in the 80s, Boston was not that great of a place. And it changed, right? Biogen came out and really accelerated the development of the ecosystem. I think the organizations represented here, and there's many others, have that potential for this region. Dave, Biotechne's made investments in startups. Amy B. the Match has. Michele, I'm not sure if Aldebaran has or not. And Dave, you guys have even acquired a local biotech in Bimogen. I'm just curious from each of you, do you see prospects for continued investment in the space, for partnerships with local companies? Might there be things that you all are looking for? And maybe I'll start, Michele, and then come up around the horn.
Yeah, so we're at this point still going to be focused as a straight up CDMO. So we won't have a therapeutic or a pipeline, so to speak. However, we're constantly looking for ways that we can continue to innovate and grow with regard to scale, the science that we're delivering in support of our clients' breakthroughs. And so we are very open to that if there is a potential fit, just to try to understand what that looks like, because if it gets us there faster or in a better way for our clients, we want to understand that. We want to make sure that we're investing in that. So I guess that's a long way of saying yes.
Very good. Amy, what about for Be the Match?
Yeah, yes, and yes. We have opportunities to invest if we can move companies forward, move cell therapy faster than us doing it on our own. That's going to come from partnerships. I don't think there's one organization that's going to be able to do everything really well, and I think more even just about the logistic component. And so partnerships with companies like Lonza or Cryoport are going to be absolutely critical for us as an organization to advance and to help advance cell therapy. So definitely looking for partnerships, joint ventures, opportunities to invest.
Indeed. And Dave, will give you the last word with it.
Yeah, I mean, we've, as you mentioned, we bought Bimogen. I mean, we look at the whole workflow for, T cell therapy and NK cell therapy and regenerative medicine. And we try to look at gaps in our portfolio. And so we're always interested in companies that can fill those gaps with the differentiating technology, especially. So we can't be all things to all people ourselves. So we bought Bimogen. We bought another company called Quad Technologies, which has a unique alginate polyethylene glycol dissolvable beads, in essence, that are used for cell activation and cell separation. We're always interested in media for growing cells, differentiating cells, freezing cells. There's a lot of little steps in there, and then there's all the instrumentation that's used around the process. So we'd like to be able to standardize approaches to how in-process testing is done, finished product testing, release criteria, all those things. So, we're constantly looking for innovative, smaller companies that we could partner with, invest in, buy. We constantly got our antenna up for that. And I think we'll continue to do more of that.
Mm-hmm. Wonderful. I think that's a great place to wrap it up with 3 organizations that are actively looking to make a difference in this just amazing scientific area, but an area that has amazing clinical impact. As we approach Thanksgiving, I just want to say I am thankful that all of you took your time this morning to share your knowledge, answer some of our questions, and to be part of the Medical Alley community. Folks, we'll call that a wrap and say thank you to our speakers today.